A clash between those who glorify death and those who sanctify life. That's how Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described the fight against Iranian-backed forces targeting Israel and America. He made those remarks in a joint address to Congress yesterday afternoon.
Just blocks from the Capitol, anti-Israeli demonstrators burned American flags and raised the Palestinian banner. In his speech, Netanyahu called the protesters, quote, Iran's useful idiots. Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem.
From the outset, Netanyahu declared his view of what's at stake in the world today.
We meet today at a crossroads of history. Our world is in upheaval. In the Middle East, Iran's axis of terror confronts America, Israel, and our Arab friends. This is not a clash of civilizations. It's a clash between barbarism and civilization. It's a clash between those who glorify death and those who sanctify life.
He said the bond between the United States and Israel is indispensable for the times.
For the forces of civilization to triumph, America and Israel must stand together. Because when we stand together, something very simple happens. We win, they lose.
Netanyahu's visit to the U.S. marked his first overseas trip since October 7th, when Hamas terrorists slaughtered, raped, and murdered nearly 1,200 Israelis, including 39 Americans, and took nearly 250 hostages. Outside the Capitol, thousands of pro-Hamas protesters chanted from the river to the sea and called for an intifada. Some carried flags of the genocidal group ISIS. Others pulled down and burned American flags while hoisting Palestinian flags in their place. Netanyahu had harsh words for the protesters.
When the tyrants of Tehran, who hang gays from cranes and murder women for not covering their hair, are praising, promoting, and funding you, you have officially become Iran's useful idiots.
Absent from the speech was Vice President Kamala Harris and dozens of other Democrats. In the audience, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib held a war criminal sign.
I really thought that was shameful. I think it suggests the kind of tactics that we've seen from the heavily anti-Semitic, anti-Israel boycott, divestiture, and sanction group, the so-called BDS people, who were very prominent amongst the protesters today.
Netanyahu said the Jews' right to the land comes from the Bible.
They call Israel a colonialist state? Don't they know that the land of Israel is where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob prayed, where Isaiah and Jeremiah preached, and where David and Solomon ruled? For nearly 4,000 years, the land of Israel has been the homeland of the Jewish people. It's always been our home. It will always be our home.
Jeff Balaban of the ACLJ told CBN News it's this connection to the Bible that binds Jews and Christians together.
And we know that so many tens of millions of Christians stand with us and behind us. And I have to tell you, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. So for 2,000 years, we really didn't feel this. And now we do.
Netanyahu ended with a clarion call that a nuclear Iran threatens both the Jewish state and the United States.
My friends, if you remember one thing from the speech, remember this. Our enemies are your enemies. Our fight is your fight. And our victory will be your victory.
Netanyahu plans to meet with both President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, followed by a meeting Friday with former President Donald Trump. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, our dear friend, Ambassador Ido Al-Haroni, is with us. He's got more than 25 years' experience in the diplomatic corps with Israel. So what's your take on the speech? How did Benjamin Netanyahu do yesterday?
Well, I think the speech hit all the right points. Obviously, I think that the emphasis on the shared values is very, very important to convey to the American people. That's on the plus side. On the minus side, I think Washington doesn't have the bandwidth right now to deal with this. They're busy doing other things. I think the speech did not get the kind of attention it deserves.
I think you've raised a great point that we're so into the presidential race right now, and along with that, the congressional and the Senate races, that do we have enough attention to the world stage? What do you think of Kamala Harris saying, I'll pass, I've got to go to a conference and not attend?
Well, I'm sure that she has her own reasons for doing that, but I think that, it's not a good thing that scores of Democrats did not show up for the speech. This must be bigger than personal disputes. I understand that many of them simply dislike Mr. Netanyahu, and that's understandable because many politicians are being disliked all over the world. It's the nature of the business. But they have to put America's interest above that. And this is not about Mr. Netanyahu. The war on October 7th is a manifestation of something much bigger, is an effort to undermine American position in the world. That's what it is. And when President Biden decides to show up 10 days into the war and decides to pass a huge aid package, he knows why. And the answer is because he knows it's also about the United States.
Well, let's talk about the world stage and something else that happened this week that I don't think got broad news coverage in the United States, and that is Hamas and Fatah coming together in Beijing to sign an accord. I know the history. I know the elections in Gaza, 2006, 2007. In the aftermath of that election, Hamas killed Fatah supporters, threw them off a rooftop. Should we all be concerned that they're now signing pacts and saying we're in this together?
Yes, absolutely, and I'll tell you why. The ancient sin of Yasser Arafat was his unwillingness to tackle his own opposition from within back in the early 1990s when the peace accords were signed with Israel. The assumption on our side was that Arafat would be interested in at least curbing his own internal opposition, just like any other national movement did, by the way. But he didn't. He didn't do anything. And Hamas grew and grew and grew, and I think that today Hamas is in a more powerful position than the mainstream or the former mainstream of the Palestinian political system represented by Fatah.
Well, I think Hamas, if they were to stand for election in Ramallah, they'd win.
Good chances they will. At least that's what most recent public opinion surveys tell us, to the extent we can rely on them. And we're not sure exactly as to the methodologies and so on, but it's consistent what we're hearing. And I also see interviews, random interviews on television with rank-and-file Palestinians from the West Bank. It seems like there's an overwhelming majority of Palestinians that support what happened on 10/7, despite of the fact, and our listeners should know that Hamas killed scores of Muslims on 10/7, which people don't realize.
I didn't know that.
Scores of Muslims were killed too. Why? It's called guilt by association. Many Muslims worked in the music festival Nova, where hundreds of peace-loving people were killed, came to dance, and Thai workers, work immigrants were killed from Thailand. So it wasn't just killing the Jews because it's a religious commandment, is killing the people associated with Jews. That's how bad it was.
Well, let's talk about that because there's a long thread. With Sinwar, the reason he was in jail in Israel is because he killed Palestinians. And the reason he killed them is they were associating with Jews. So he murdered them and was put in jail for murder, then released. He is now saying he has Israel right where he wants them. That sent a chill down my spine, that here's a leader of Hamas saying, I don't care about the destruction of Gaza. I don't care about my own citizens. The only thing I care about is where does Israel stand on the world stage, and can we succeed in wiping her off the map? What's the reaction to all of that in Israel?
Well, the Israelis, I think, are united in two things. The first is that we need to bring to an end the rule of Hamas in Gaza, if that includes the elimination of Sinwar and his friends, or the expulsion, like what happened with Arafat in Beirut in '82. He was in the same position and he left. We allowed him to leave. So he was expelled out of Beirut. That's the first thing. The second thing the Israelis are united around is the need to get a deal on the release of the hostages. Why is that so important? First of all, it's a value in Jewish tradition.
You save one life, you save the world.
Exactly. You save one life, it's as if you saved the entire world. Secondly, that's the glue that keeps Israeli society together. Mutual responsibility. It's been always our core value. If the government will fail, then I don't feel safe to send my son to serve in the army. God forbid something happens to him. So it sends a very strong message. So these are two things. Now, there is an opposition, a political opposition, to the idea that Israel will sign a deal that will give Hamas any kind of victory. And that opposition usually comes from the far right of the Israeli political spectrum. So Mr. Netanyahu is between a rock and a hard place here. If he caves in to them, he angers them, and vice versa. So that's the situation. There are no easy solutions. What happened in 10/7 is that Israel was put in a position where there are no good options, only bad options or worst options.
Well, let's talk about some of the worst options that are on the world stage right now. Our Secretary of State said Iran is within weeks of getting enough fissionable material to create a bomb. Our own State Department is questioning whether the Houthis are really a terrorist organization. And I remind everybody watching, it was under the Biden administration that the terror designation was taken off so that humanitarian aid could go into Yemen. But it looks like that also allowed them to get a whole bunch of rockets and weapons that are currently being used against Israel and against the U.S. Navy. On top of that, they started funding again, and again, the first week of the Biden administration, funding UNRWA. So in all of that, it seems like there's a willful blindness within our Foreign Service, within the State Department, within administrations, and it's not just Democrats, but Republicans as well. They seem to turn a blind eye to the threat. What do you think is going to wake us up?
Unfortunately, only a cataclysmic event, something that will shatter the foundation to its core, unfortunately. Once Iran becomes nuclear, everybody understands it's game over. They become untouchable. You can't do anything militarily. But here's the point. There's a whole, this thing called concept creep, when a good idea slowly is moving to become a bad idea. And that's the whole discussion around the underdog. The idea that the underdog, we need to view the world through the eyes of the underdog, which is a noble idea, slowly became that the underdog is always right and the underdog has permission to do whatever they want. And that's what you see basically. Compassion is important, is central, for people of faith, but too much compassion can be paralyzing, can be debilitating. And that's what you're seeing. The idea that the Houthis is not a terrorist organization is insanity. The idea that we have to provide humanitarian aid to our enemy that is trying to kill us. I mean, we need to revisit those ideas. It's true, there are innocent people, and they need to be protected in Gaza, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, wherever you go, in every war zone. Unfortunately and sadly, there are innocent people. There were innocent people in Dresden that were killed. There were innocent people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki that were killed. That doesn't mean that that we should deliberately aim to harm them. War is not noble, but it is necessary in some cases, and this is the case.
I'm kind of chilled with it's going to take a cataclysmic event. We had a report earlier this week that in all likelihood there are already terrorist cells in the United States, have come through. Our borders have been essentially open for 4 years, and they're already here. Do you think that's imminent?
Well, I think that, thank God, since 9/11, we didn't have another major event, and the credit goes to American security establishment, and I think they've been very, very effective because the motivation is there. There's no doubt in my mind that the motivation is there, and I'm afraid that those groups are being emboldened by the events of 10/7, by the support that they see even here on American soil, let alone in Europe. And bad things will happen. Bad things will happen in Europe, and bad things could happen here. Hopefully, they won't. But that's my fear, that's my concern.
Where's the hope here? One of the things that got me hope yesterday was it literally turned into a continuous standing ovation, where people in Congress said, "I'm not going to sit down anymore. I'm just going to stand and continue to applaud." It seems like there's so much grassroots support for Israel, for our common cause against, I don't have a better word, Islamic death cult, that they just seem to be bent on destruction. They don't care about their own people. They don't care about us. They care about some strange ideology that glorifies death. Is that our hope, to stand together?
Yes, so there are two things that I'd like to say on this issue. The first is, one ray of hope is that apparently there's a disconnect between what's happening on the political echelon and what's happening in grassroots. We see that every public opinion survey indicates a strong 75 to 80% support for Israel. Americans experienced 10/7 very much like the way they experienced 9/11. So there's a solid support. Most Americans do understand what's at stake. Most Americans do understand it's an intercivilizational clash, and they understand that the other civilization is not about, accepting our values. They get it. So that's one source of hope. The second is the response of Israeli society to this challenge. And I've never seen anything like it, and I'm 62 years old. I've never seen anything like it. My son's unit in the Army, they had 150% response, meaning they had more people than they expected showing up on October 8th to serve in reserves. The spirit of the Israelis is just incredible. And it's true, we were hit hard. Israelis are still in shock, but there's a source of optimism when you see how the young generation is ready, is ripe to become the future leaders of our people.
Well, I'll give a hearty amen. Ambassador, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
You're our dear friend, and be assured we stand with you, we stand with Israel.